Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Penn State 365 podcast. My name is Dylan Callaghan-Croley, beat writer and recruiting analyst here at Nittany Nation of the Rivals Network, covering Penn State football and athletics overall. I'm joined by my co-host Marty Leap. He's back at it after missing out last week. Anthony is missing out this week, but hopes to be back next week. Marty, 30-40 minute episode here, jam packed, however, talking Penn State recruiting as well as previewing the offenses. We're just less than a month away from the Nittany Lions taking on the Purdue Boilermakers in West Lafayette next month on September 1st. Let's jump right into the recruiting side of things. The big thing is, of course, quarterback Jackson Smolik has emerged as Penn State's potential quarterback in the 2023 recruiting class, a guy that emerged last month nationally after a strong performance at the Elite 11 camp. Picked up an offer from Cal shortly after that, and really jumped on to Penn State's board following the decommitment of Marcus Stokes when he flipped to Florida. They wanted to get uh, Smolik on campus this month last month at the Elite Prospect Camp. See how he performed. He performed well, earned an offer from that camp, and now it's just wait and see to see if he's going to stay committed to Tulane or potentially flip his commitment to Penn State or elsewhere. Marty, what's your thoughts on Smolik here? And do you think he could be a good addition for the class? Personally, I think for where they are in the cycle, this would be a great pickup for Penn State and a potentially sneaky good pickup at that.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. To lose your quarterback commit this late into the cycle, and if you can rebound by landing a kid like Jackson Smolik, that's a very good rebound. You mentioned his performance at the Elite 11, and this is not to say one quarterback's better than the other or anything of the sort, but Smolik did outperform Marcus Stokes at the Elite 11. Like I said, that's not me trying to say Jackson Smolik is a better quarterback than Marcus Stokes is by any means, but the fact that he has enough talent to go out there and be more impressive than Stokes was in that setting obviously speaks highly of his talent. I think it's one of those things people really need to overlook the fact he's committed to Tulane. He's battled some injuries in his high school career, which has impacted his recruitment as well. He's garnered other Power 5 interest since the Elite 11. He's got the talent to play Power 5 football. He's going to play Power 5 football. And, all signs point toward that being at Penn State.
Absolutely, 100%. And that is, like I said, just something we're going to have to monitor over the next few weeks. He wants to, I believe, make a decision before the end of the month. So we'll have to wait and see. But if he picks up no other offers, which I think he probably will pick up at least a couple more here, I think Penn State sits in a good position for him either way. And yeah, just a wait and see spot there. But like I said, Penn State's in a good spot. Some other recruiting notables. Linebacker Kavion Keys, three-star out of Richmond, Virginia. He's set to make a decision August 27th. That is a Penn State UNC battle. It's going to be until that decision. That's a player that Penn State felt really good about coming out of his official visit in June. UNC did get him on campus at the end of last month. Something just to monitor there if the Tar Heels were able to swing momentum back to their side because Penn State definitely had the momentum heading into the end of July. So we'll see what happens there. I think it's going to be probably pretty quiet on that front until his commitment on August 27th. Um, Additionally, Penn State obviously missed on offensive tackle Evan Link at the end of July when he when he committed to the Michigan Wolverines. This was a commitment I didn't necessarily see coming. It seemed for the longest time it was a Penn State Stanford battle. Michigan was never able to get him on campus, but the Wolverines finally were able to at the end of last month for their barbecue event, and it was enough to get Link to commit to the Wolverines. I will say, as the month went on and we did not hear anything out of Link, it started to seem much like a scenario of he was just really wanting to get to Michigan. And obviously, when somebody wants to get to a program that badly, you have to think the chances of them potentially landing at a program if they do get on a visit is pretty high. And he ended up on that visit and obviously paid off for the Wolverines. It's a big sting for the Nittany Lions on the recruiting trail, especially when you consider he's going to an conference rival, an in-division rival in Michigan. Big miss for the Nittany Lions here, Marty. No way else to put it. What's your thoughts on Evan Link?
Definitely a big miss. As this cycle would went on, Link had become a very important recruit for Penn State. They have a very good offensive line class. You have Alex Birchmeyer on the inside. You have Javen Williams, two top 100 kids. Anthony Donko seems to really be coming along well as a tackle, but you lose Link to Michigan. You have Joshua Miller flip to Georgia earlier in the summer. All of a sudden, you're kind of left scrambling for another offensive tackle in this class. So they really need to find one. Hopefully Phil Troutwine will be able to do that. They're going to cast a wide net. They're going to wind up taking another offensive tackle. It's just going to be a matter of, the pedigree and the caliber of the player that it is. But yeah, losing Link was one of those that I think kind of goes under the radar. Like you said, it was a very quiet kid, very quiet recruitment. So those recruitments tend to fly under the radar, but not being able to close Link out is definitely a big blow to this recruiting class and to the offensive line.
100%. And over on Nittany Nation for our subscribers, by the way, never a better time to go subscribe to Nittany Nation right now. You can get the entirety of August for free. The promo codes are up on our website, but just in case you can't find it, the promo code for that is kickoff 22. So all capitals KICKOFF 22. That is the promo code. Get a free trial for all of August. And that is valid for any team site. So I hope that if you're a Penn State fan, you subscribe to the Penn State rival site. But if you want to subscribe to any other sites with that, or if you're a fan of any other team and just trying to get some inside intel on the Nittany Lions, be sure to use that promo code for your team's website. That being said, over on Nittany Nation, we have gone over some guys that Penn State could be targeting on the offensive line going forward. Not going to get into any of those names, just not on here right now, just because still a lot of things to develop there. A lot of offers still have to go out. Relationships have to be built. Visits have to be made. That the offensive line and that tackle spot is going to be something that goes on for a couple months, I think, before Penn State finds an answer there, since they kind of have to go back to square one in that on that front. Additionally, wide receiver Justin Brown, who was on campus last week, is set to make a decision Friday, shortly after this podcast goes up. Uh, right now, it sounds like he is not going to be committed to Penn State. Sounds like he's going elsewhere. I have a future cast in for Mississippi State. Tough pill for Penn State to swallow. They really liked how he performed last week at the camp, and uh, definitely would have loved to add him to this class if they could have. I mean, they still could. He could surprise us. But if Justin Brown does in fact go elsewhere, Penn State will have to kind of reset the wide receiver board a bit. Carmelo Taylor did delay his commitment last week, so he's still out there. Perhaps Penn State circles back there, tries to make up the room that South Carolina has built a lead on. So, any thoughts on the wide receiver board? Justin Brown, Carmelo Taylor, anything there, Marty?
One thing I will say about the wide receiver board that kind of surprises me um, is you look at what Taylor Stubblefield has accomplished in his career as a wide receivers coach, especially the last few seasons at Penn State. You produced a first round pick in Jahan Dotson. You've produced a lot of talented receivers, a lot of productive receivers, and they're struggling on the recruiting track receiver, which is weird to me. That said, there are a few coaches on this staff I have more faith in their ability to develop talents and to bring players along than Taylor Stubblefield. So I think they'll be okay. And finding productive receivers it's not always hard to do, especially if you can just find some guys with speed. But yeah, it has surprised me to see them struggle on the trail wide receiver the way they have.
Yeah, definitely something that's come off as quite shocking because, like you said, the track record that the program has at that position, especially in the James Franklin era. I mean, Chris Godwin, Jahan Dotson, KJ Hamler, the list goes on and on. And those are just, high impact guys. And not to, to mention guys like Deshaun Hamilton and others. Um, Other than that, I do have one or two other notables to quickly go over before we get into the offensive preview. Um, Linebacker Corey Lucius is set to make a commitment this month. Um, there are concerns about his size inside lash, so I'm not sure he's a take for the Nittany Lions. If he ends up a take, definitely somebody to watch there. But with Kavion Keys potentially coming at the end of the month, I think Lucius is a guy that we may not see Penn State take right now. But if they miss on Keys and a couple other guys, Lucius is a guy that they may circle back around towards the end of the cycle. They need to fill a spot. Additionally, 2024 offensive tackle Jake Garnera out of Point Verda, Florida, is going to be making a trip to Happy Valley this upcoming season for the whiteout against Minnesota. We learned that this week. And two names that I think Penn State is off to a good start with in future classes. 2024 quarterback KJ Jackson was at camp in the Lash Bash last week. Did a phenomenal job at the camp. Came away really impressed at Lash Bash as well. He plans on getting back up to Happy Valley sometime this season for a visit. He really loves the coaching staff, building a good relationship with Yursich as well as James Franklin. Um, 2026 defensive lineman Preston Kerry, another name to watch, just a massive human being already. He's going to be one of the top overall prospects in the 2026 recruiting class. Penn State's gone off to a really good start with him as well. And I should mention 2023 defensive back Zion Tracy is going to be a name to watch going forward. Performed extraordinarily well, opened a lot of eyes at the camp last week. Has not earned an offer yet, but I think an offer could be coming. I mean, this kid has legit track speed. He performed well in drills, went up against Johnny Shakur, did well in that, did well against him as well. I think an offer could be coming for him in the future. He is going to make an official visit the week of September 9th through September 11th for the Ohio game. A name to watch. I think Penn State could very well add him to the class here, and if they offer him, I think they become the favorite. Any thoughts on any of those recruiting tidbits? We'll have more next week on the recruiting side of things. It's been a little quiet here the last few days.
The only thing I would add was Zion Tracy. It definitely seems like he's a kid that they want to get a little bit of game film on from his senior season before making a final decision. You know, you had him on campus. He camped extremely well. I believe it ran like a sub 4.40, something crazy like that. So the athleticism is there. They have the official visit scheduled. Seems like they want to see a little bit of game film. But like you said, if they offer, have to imagine that's one that probably wraps up pretty quickly.
I 100% agree. Now, like I said, that's all for the recruiting stuff today. Want to get into previewing the offense. We'll have more recruiting stuff uh, next week's episode. And perhaps we'll even do multiple episodes going forward, maybe a recruiting episode per week and um, a on the field episode per week, per se. All right, Marty, you ready to break down the Penn State offense heading into 2022 here?
Absolutely.
All right. We'll do just a quick little preview of each position, go through the main players at each position. Let's start at quarterback, Marty. This is going to be the position that makes or breaks Penn State season. It's the most important position in all of sports, the quarterback. Sean Clifford returns for his on as sixth year with the program, fourth year as the starting quarterback of Penn State, has a chance to break pretty much every school record this year for quarterbacks. Big year for Clifford. He started off really well last year. Even was in the Heisman conversation through the first 5 weeks. Went down with that injury against Iowa. Performed all right down the stretch for the Nittany Lions, but never had that same success he had early in the season. Penn State, if they can get the Clifford they saw early in the season last year, I think this is a team that's going to be very dangerous in the Big Ten. Could be a contender in the Big Ten East and the conference overall. If you're a contender in the Big East, of course. Um, I mean, for Clifford, I think it's not really going to impact his NFL quarterback aspects all too much. I think he is what he is in terms of that, but I still think there's a step forward that he can take and end his college career here on a high note in 2022.
Absolutely. I think Clifford, for the first time in his career as a starter, having the same offensive coordinator in back-to-back seasons could prove to go a long way also. He didn't have to spend this offseason learning an offense like he'd done the last 2 or 3. He was able to spend the offseason mastering Mike Yurcich's offense, which I think is a huge thing that cannot be overlooked. It's like you said, it's the most important position in sports. There's no position in any sport more important than quarterback. And we saw last year when he was healthy in this offense running at what it could do. And If Clifford doesn't get hurt against Iowa, who knows where that season goes. So I think that's the most important thing this year is you've got to keep him healthy. But one thing I will say, if Clifford does get banged up again, which with the type of football he plays is very possible, the quarterback room is just night and day now as opposed to where it was last year when he got hurt and you were scrambling to throw Taquan Roberson out there and literally could not even snap the ball. The quarterback room is just, again, night and day from where it was last year.
100% agree. And you mentioned Roberson. That was a big issue going into last season was the Penn State only had one quarterback with legitimate snaps under his belt, and that was Clifford. And so when Clifford went down, they were in a very bad spot, and we saw what happened with Roberson at Iowa. Um, the one guy who did step up last year in Clifford's absence, Christian Veilleux, he's still only I think, a redshirt freshman this year now. Um, but 2 years on campus already. Veilleux kind of is a forgotten guy in this quarterback room because they brought in Drew Allar and Bo Pribula in the 2022 recruiting class. But Veilleux has shown quite a bit of upside. Good arm strength. The accuracy looked solid last year in his performances against Rutgers and Arkansas. Uh, I think Veilleux has a chance to be a really good college quarterback, Power 5 starter. And it's going to be a big year for him, especially if Clifford goes down because Drew Allar is right behind him, and after this season, it's going to be a battle of Veilleux and Allar next spring. Decide who's Penn State's starting quarterback in 2023. And even if he ends up transferring elsewhere, having a showing that he can take over an offense this season if needed, and be relied on to move that offense consistently down the field would be huge for him so he can go out and get offers elsewhere if he does decide to transfer. But that's obviously something way down the line, something we shouldn't even be really discussing. We should just focus on what is now, which is Penn State, in my mind, has a quarterback that if Clifford goes down, they can rely on and trust to move the offense down the field and not to be a liability out there. And he may not light it up, but he's somebody you can trust.
Yeah, just having somebody you can trust that goes a long way. I mean, like I said, last year against Iowa, there were points Taquan Roberson literally could not get the ball snapped. In Veilleux, when he played, looked pretty good. I mean, everyone's going to remember that Rutgers game. He looked really well in. It's just good to have that there. And you look at Veilleux, it's not like this is a kid who coming out of high school was not highly recruited or something. I mean, Penn State had to beat out Clemson to win that recruitment, and it was a recruitment where Clemson legitimately wanted him, was pushing for his commitment. So, the talent's definitely there with Veilleux, and that just goes a long way to have that depth of quarterback. Because again, as we've seen with Sean Clifford, every year he's been the starter. He's been banged up in some fashion. The way he plays, it's going to happen. So you need to have contingency plans in place, and this year Penn State does.
All right, moving on to the depth quarterbacks now. If for some reason Clifford and Veilleux went down, it would be an interesting spot for Penn State. Of course, I already mentioned them, brought in 2022 recruiting class Drew Allar and Bo Pribula. Allar obviously is the big name here. It's the guy that Penn State fans are already dreaming about what he could possibly do with this program going forward. Big arm quarterback. I mean, these are the type of quarterbacks that take you to the next level if they pan out. And that's going to be the question with Allar. Can he pan out now that he's on campus this spring? He has ups and downs, but the potential is there. The ceiling is sky high for Drew Allar. That being said, Bro Papula, I think maybe is the guy who's possibly a little bit more ready now. He's the much more polished passer than Allar. Um, but both these guys, I think, I mean, are obviously in for redshirt seasons. If they need to play more than 4 games, something seriously went wrong for Penn State at the quarterback position, whether it was injury or performance. Um, but at the end of the day, for two depth quarterbacks, high potential here. But obviously, guys, you don't want to necessarily have to play this year if you don't have to, unless it's in a mop up situation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming at some point this year, you're going to see at least one of them, if not both of them, in a game. Ohio, Central Michigan, Rutgers, Indiana, something like that. When it's lopsided, you're going to want to give them some live game reps, and I'm sure the Beaver Stadium crowd is going to be very excited whenever that does come for Drew Allar. and he'll probably come in and make some throw where you just ooh and ah over it and gush over it, and everyone wants him to start. But that's a conversation for another day. But yeah, I do think that Alar obviously is a little bit more of a project than you would like to see from a kid who some places had as almost the number one overall player in the country. But he'll definitely need a year or so of development. But just it's unlimited potential there. And like you said, you mentioned Prabula. Prabula is no scrub himself. He has the ability to go out and be a very good Power Five quarterback also. So this is definitely the deepest quarterback room James Franklin has had since he's been in Happy Valley. And hopefully he doesn't have to use too much of it this year, but it's nice to have it there for this year and beyond.
Apologies for that. I 100% agree with you there. And yeah, we'll have to see how both those guys develop. But on paper, Penn State quarterback room is just so much more depth than they had the last few years, especially when you look at the rotation of depth quarterbacks they've had: Mika Bowens, Michael Johnson Jr., um, even Will Levis. It's been a carousel of backup quarterbacks there and depth quarterbacks. The only constant in the room has been Sean Clifford, but now um,
Yeah,
the
you
depth
mean
has.
potential number one overall pick, Will Levis?
Yeah, that's a whole conversation for another day. But uh, I would say for the James Franklin era, this is the best depth they have had in his tenure in Happy Valley. Any other thoughts on quarterbacks?
No, I don't think so. We covered it pretty well.
All right. Let's move on then to the running backs. So at running back, I think we are confident the first two names that'll be in the rotation, Kevon Lee and Nick Singleton. Lee did a good job last year for how the offensive line had performed in front of him. I mean, he still averaged, I think, 5 yards a carry. He's a good running back. If he could learn to not try to be as a shifty of a running back and just play north-south, I think his potential even rises higher. And of course, behind him is the superstar freshman Nick Singleton, some a player that Penn State's confident is going to be a big part of their offense this season and going forward. Uh, he is on the level of Saquon Barkley, Miles Sanders, Journey Brown, that type of running back that Penn State has missed over the last 2 seasons. I expect big things out of Singleton, and I expect big things out of Lee this year. Of course, it comes down to the offensive line, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But at the end of the day, uh, pretty good 1-2 punch for Penn State. Arguably the second best 1-2 punch in the Big Ten.
Yeah, very excited about Nick Singleton in this running back room. He's like you said, you don't want to compare kids to Barkley. That's just the worst thing you can do. But he's gotten a lot of Barkley esque praise and comparison since he arrived on campus last January. I think him and Lee could be a nice combination together. I do think Singleton is he's not going to start the year as a starter. It'll be Kevon Lee, but I think by the end of the year, you see Singleton as the primary back. But I do think that this could also benefit Lee in a lot of ways because last year I felt like a lot of times Kevon Lee was trying to do too much. He shied away from what made him a successful runner the previous year of, not being afraid to be that kind of Noah Kane type from 2019. Hey, give me my 3 or 4 yards. I'll fall forward. I'll go back to the huddle and I'll do it again. I felt like he was trying to bust too many big plays, which led to him just not running aggressively and leading to problems. And I do think that now that you have Singleton in the mix with his home run ability, hopefully that will lead to Kevon Lee not feeling like he has to be something he's not, making him not leading him feel like he's got to make the big play, and that'll hopefully give you a nice little thunder lightning combination. Again, similar to what we saw with Noah Kane and Journey Brown in 2019.
Absolutely agree with you there. Um, After Singleton, it becomes a question of who's going to be that number three running back. Is it going to be Kaziah Holmes? Is it going to be another fellow freshman, Katron Allen, or is it going to be Devin Ford, who it feels like he's been on campus forever? Obviously, his career has been disappointed thus far. Came on campus as um, a five-star recruit. People thought he was going to be the next in line there, following Saquon and Miles Sanders. Hasn't happened for him yet. But yeah, that's an interesting battle to watch here in camp. Holmes has some upside. I mean, fast, shifty running back. Allen much more built in the Kevon Lee uh, style of runner, but has some shiftiness and speed himself. And Ford, I mean, he can do a little bit of everything. Like I said, career's been a little disappointing thus far, considering where he was coming out of high school. But yeah, I don't even know who to give the edge here. I would say maybe Ford, but I mean, it, it it's tough. It's tough position there and battle to look at. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. I mean, you mentioned Devin Ford, and your instinct there thinks, all right, he's the veteran guy, he's fourth year on campus. He's going to have the trust of the coaching staff as your number three running back. But you look back at his career, there's been costly fumbles. There was the debacle against Indiana when he shouldn't have scored. So I don't know how much of the faith is there in the staff. I do think there's a role for Devin Ford on this team in some fashion, even if it's on special teams, because he's such a great athlete. As for running back, though, I don't know. I mean, I think he probably starts the year as the number three guy. I don't know where things go. You mentioned Kaziah Holmes, a lot of potential there with his speed and with his shiftiness. And Katron Allen, I mean, I feel like he's a kid who the ceiling may not be super high, but the floor is very high, and he's probably already there. So do you look to get Allen carries? I think he's ready to play. I do, as a true freshman running back coming out of IMG Academy. And it's fitting because he's an IMG back the same way Noah Kane was. But again, a lot of comparisons between him and Noah Kane. So I think the running back room, like the quarterback room, is in a much better spot than it was last year with the additions of Singleton and Allen. I mean, Singleton might very quickly become one of the most special running backs in all of college football, in all honesty. But there's a lot of talent there, and I just feel like when you have that much talent, you'll figure it out and things will be okay.
Yeah, obviously one of the deeper running back rooms in the entire country, and um, the other thing to note with both Devin Ford and Kaziah Holmes is neither one had a ton of carries last year. Ford had 14, Holmes had 5. Holmes did play during the COVID year in 2020, 264 yards and 2 touchdowns. Uh, it's going to be interesting because neither of those two really have seen the field much lately. And then Katron Allen, like you said, the ceiling may not be extraordinarily high, but the floor is, and he's a guy who definitely could come in right away and make an impact in that running back rotation. Uh, so definitely something to watch there at running back for that number 3 spot. But at number 1 and 2 is Kayvon Lee and Nick Singleton, and I wouldn't be shocked if Singleton un, becomes the starter within a few weeks of the season starting.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one other quick note on Keziah Holmes too. You mentioned 11 to 5 carries last year. From the get go last year, the plan was for him to redshirt after how much he had played the previous season when he had to because of injuries and things of that nature. So I do think that needs to be taken into consideration also. So it'll be curious to see how he responds now coming out of that redshirt year of just learning the ins and outs of running back and putting on the weight that he needed to add in the weight room.
100% agree. Let's move on to wide receiver. Go through wide receiver and tight end a little quickly because um, both have quality depth. I think I have more questions at tight end right now than I do wide receiver. Wide receiver, let's run through the starters quickly. At number 1, your number 1 receiver is going to be Parker Washington. He has just been phenomenal his first few years here on uh, campus for Penn State. It looks like a potential top 3 round draft pick next year's NFL draft. Um, Number 2 wide receiver, probably going to be the Western Kentucky transfer Mitchell Tinsley. Racked up 1,000 yards and 10 plus touchdowns with the Hilltoppers last year. Brings an explosive weapon to Penn State's offense. And the Washington Tinsley 1-2 punch is just a phenomenal 1-2 punch at wide receiver of Penn State. And they've had those the last few years. Unfortunately, they haven't been able to do as much as they probably should have with them. But Washington Tinsley has the chance to be as good of a 1-2 punch there as they've had in quite a while. And your final starter probably going to be Keandre Lambert Smith. Has shown a lot of flashes throughout his first few years on campus, but has yet to put it all together. That's going to be something to watch this year. Can he start to put it all together and be a consistent presence in the wide receiver room and on the field for Penn State? Any thoughts on those 3?
Really good group to start with. And I mean, Parker Washington is just consistent as consistent could be. Great hands. He's going to run good routes. He's going to get open and catch the ball. He's never going to make me super flashy. Actually, I think it's kind of fitting that Taylor Stubblefield is his position coach because he reminds me a lot of Taylor Stubblefield as a receiver at Purdue. Never flashy, but just consistently got open, caught the ball, moved the chains. Tinsley, it's a very nice addition. Everything he did at Western Kentucky last year. And one thing of note on Tinsley also is last year in Western Kentucky, he played Purdue and Indiana. He put up some pretty big numbers, so he's done it against Big Ten defenses. Keandre Lambert Smith is definitely the wild card of the three, in my opinion. Like we said, inconsistency have been his issues his first years on campus. He's battled drops. Last year, towards the end of the year, he really looked like he was starting to put it together. Made a couple of big plays in the Outback Bowl against Arkansas. So if Keandre Lambert Smith can take a step forward this year, you're looking at one of the better wide receiver trios in the Big Ten with that three.
And then another wild card that, since you mentioned as a wild, Keandre Lambert Smith as a wild card, another wild card who could potentially see start time as a starter is Malik Mega. I mean, massive wide receiver, really the big body wide receiver that Penn State has kind of been missing since over the last few years. A true big body wide receiver presence. I mean, at 6'4", that's just a physical gift that not many wide receivers have. He's quite athletic. He has pretty good speed as well. It'll be interesting to see how he continues his development and if he's somebody who can really just have a breakout season for Penn State this year. Because with such dangerous weapons in Washington and Tinsley, either Keandre Lambert Smith or Malik Mega, I think, are in for big seasons.
Yeah, Mega's a guy too. Really interested to see what happens. I don't think he's a polished product yet. I think last year, had it not been for an injury in camp, we would have seen a lot more of him early in the year as this deep play threat. I think he's going to be a guy who's going to go out there, and he's, like I said, he's not a complete package yet, but every so often you're going to see him get behind a defender and make a 40, 50-yard catch like he did last year against Rutgers for his first career touchdown. There's just so much potential there. Sky high ceiling for Mega. He's a kid still. He's from Canada, so he's still learning and adjusting to the American version of football as opposed to what they play in Canada, because there are some differences there, especially for receivers. But yeah, a lot of potential there in Mega. Really curious to see what he can do this season. Same with Trey Wallace, who I know the staff has just raved about since he's gotten to campus. Going to be a redshirt freshman. Uber athletic, can play inside and out at receiver. I think he's another one that we're going to see make some splash plays this year.
Agree with you there. Quickly, the rest of the depth at the position, if you have anything to say about any of them, feel free. Liam Clifford, Jaden Dottin, Harrison Wallace, three main guys with Mega as depth pieces. I think all three likely see the field at some point or another this season. Liam Clifford, I have to imagine even if it's not a ton, they want to get him some time on the field if it makes sense, so he can play with his brother. That I think he could be a sneaky good weapon for Penn State down the road. I still think a little bit more development. Jaden Dottin, I mean, not the fastest wide receiver, but a nice, somewhat big-bodied guy there, good size. Has shown some flashes in practices. Harrison Wallace, we've seen flash at times with tremendous athleticism. He made a great catch in the spring game. Another guy who could possibly break into the rotation this year is a true freshman, Caden Saunders, the four-star recruit, top on our prospect out of Westerville, Ohio in the 2022 recruiting class. Elite speed, elite agility, potential future number one wide receiver. Uh, I don't know how much we'll see him on the field this year, but I think he's the type that if you put on the field early, see what he can do, and if he can show the ability to be a playmaker at this level early on, you find the snaps for him.
Yeah, Saunders is a kid. I think somehow, some way, he works his way onto the field this year. There's too much talent there not to. Like you said, potential future number one wide receiver down the road. Reminds me a lot of KJ Hamler and a lot of different things he does. And the only thing that prevented Hamler from playing as a freshman was tearing his ACL his senior year of high school and just not being physically ready to go. So I think we'll see Saunders primarily in the slot. He could play outside if need be. We could see him make an impact on the return game. I don't know what Caden Saunders is going to do this year, but I think there's going to be at least a couple times he's going to come out and make a play where he's going to show everyone why he was, a borderline 5-star recruit coming out of high school.
Agreed. Let's move on to tight end. Tight end was a position last year that Penn State fans thought would continue the trend of just great play. It did not. It was quite a disappointing room for Penn State last year. Um, I I honestly think any of the top three guys in that room could legitimately start for Penn State this year. I mean, Theo Johnson is the prototypical NFL prospect. Has the size, has good speed, good hands, everything you look for in a tight end. And if somebody's going to have a breakout season, be a dominant tight end, I expect it to be Theo Johnson. Brennan Strange has been a guy that has good size, athleticism is there, has shown some flashes here and there, but hasn't put it all together yet. Um, Big make or break, I think, fall camp for him. And then Tyler Warren. I mean, this is a kid who's only been playing tight end for what, 2 years now, and he was impressive last year as a freshman for Penn State. Made some terrific catches, not a ton of catches, not a ton of yards, but he is somebody you could throw the ball to in coverage, and he's going to bring it down. Just great hands on him early on in his career. I think he has a really high ceiling. It's just going to take a little bit more development there. And then other names to know, both depth pieces, Cleo Dinkins and Jerry Cross. Cross, a freshman from the 2022 class. I expect to redshirt this year. Any thoughts on Johnson, Strange, Warren, or Dinkins?
Well, first thing I'm going to say is I hope that Tyler Warren, all his snaps this year are tight end, and we don't see him getting the ball at quarterback at all. And just let's take that
No
package and fire
Theo.
that.
Sorry, no Tyler Warren. Wildcat formations.
No, thank you. Let's take that package and fire that baby right into the sun. But no, to move on from that, it's tight end to me. It's a room. There's talent there. It's undeniable. There's talent there, but there was talent there last year, and they severely underachieved, especially blocking. A lot of the problems last year on the offensive line, there were issues there with the tight ends and blocking too that just kind of had a ripple down effect at times. The tight ends need to be a lot better. That falls to the feet of Ty Howell. Last year was not a good first year for him as tight ends coach. Obviously, big shoes to replace with Tyler Bowen, but the tight ends have to be better. The talent's there. Theo Johnson, like you said, your prototypical potential first tight end off the board, the NFL draft kind of guy. He can block, he can run, he can catch, but we need to see more consistency. Tyler Warren, again, coming along, but is he there yet? High school quarterback, moving to tight end, who knows? Huge year for Brenton Strange, absolutely huge year. Strange last year had some, as bad as the offense was against Iowa when Sean Clifford got hurt, there were two just brutal drops by Brenton Strange in the second half of that game, where if he hauls them in, Penn State probably still hangs on and wins that game. So this is a huge year for Strange. Last year, after those drops, he just seemed to never regain his confidence, and his playing time really waned as the season went on. So it's a big year for the tight end room in general. I'm cautiously optimistic they will improve just because there's so much talent there. But like I said, there was a lot of talent there last year, and those three just consistently could not get the job done. So big year for the tight end room, big year for Ty Howell, and like I said, a very big year for Brenton Strange specifically.
100% agree with you on the tight ends, and that'll be something we watch closely in practices when we do have the ability to watch practices. And if I had to guess which one is going to be the starter at this point, I would have to lean. I mean, which way would you? I almost lean towards Johnson, but I could see it very well being Strange as well. Who are you leaning towards as being the starter?
I would assume Johnson's a starter. He was by the end of the year last year. Has the higher ceiling of the two and does not have the drop issues that Strange had last year. I mean, I think we're going to see them both. I think we're going to see a lot of 12 personnel in general this year, especially with, I mean, we just went over the receiver room. Yes, there's a lot of intriguing pieces there, but not a lot of proven pieces. So I think that'll lead to a lot of 12 personnel, especially early in the season. And ultimately, if you're Penn State, you look at Johnson and you look at Strange and you look at and Warren as well. The ability these guys should have as a pass catcher should also lead you to want to run 12 personnel because it can be a nightmare matchup for defenses coming across the middle trying to cover those guys. So, like I said, I think Johnson will be the starter, but I think at least early on we see a lot of all three, and then those things tend to work themselves out. If we get a few weeks in and Strange is still struggling, I think we'll see his playing time start to fall and Johnson play more as a true starter type with Warren getting more snaps. But I think first snap of the year against Purdue, if there's only one tight end on the field, I think it'll be Johnson.
Well, 100%. 100%. And Johnson is the type of tight end too, kind of in the uh, ideal of a Mike Gesicki, who with the Dolphins lines up quite a bit more so as a wide receiver than he does as tight end. Johnson has that athleticism and size to do that, so he does bring versatility to your offense as well. But I 100% agree with you that Johnson, I think, should be the starter week one, first snap of the season. Let's get on to the final part of the offense. The most important, the one that we wonder every year, is this the year they take the step forward? That's the offensive line. Um, the offensive line has a couple ways they could probably line up this year. If I had to take a guess right now, I would wonder if it's from left to right. Oluf Shanu, Landon Tengwall, Juice Scruggs, Hunter Norzad, the Cornell transfer, and Caden Wallace. There finally a right tackle. Uh, the potential is there. I mean, Shanu, Tengwall, Wallace, all massive human beings. Norzad has good size as well. Scruggs has good size, has developed really nicely. I mean, after his career got off to such a tough start with that car accident and his back, he's come along nicely. Um, a lot of potential on this offensive line, a lot of size. Fashanu looked quality last year in the bowl game against Arkansas. Tangwall, I think, has all the makings of a future NFL guard. And then with Scruggs and Norzad, I mean, Norzad is a guy who can move over to center if needed. Caden Wallace, you could flip to left tackle if needed. Sal Wormley, I mean, could play guard as well if needed, slide into the right guard spot as well. Um, a lot you could do there with those four plus Sal Wormley.
Yeah, the offensive line, it's very much, I'm never going to believe it until I see it. It seems like it's been this way every year for however long now. Phil Troutwine, for as good of a job as he's done in the recruiting trail, the on-field product in his 2 years at Penn State has not been good. I mean, there's pieces to like about this line. I do think that left side of Olu Fashanu and Landon Tangwall can, in time, become a really, really damn good left side of an offensive line. But they're young
Wh- Which
guys. There's
you
going to be
which you
growing
needed to
pains.
be with it being Clifford's blind side.
Exactly. But I mean, there'll be some growing pains early in the year, but I think those two are going to prove to be really good offensive linemen. You look at center, I think Juice Scruggs is much better suited for center than guard. And, the further away he gets from that car accident, the healthier, the stronger, the bigger he gets, the better it is for him. And, but the right side of that offensive line, though, it's two question marks. I mean, comparing Hunter Norzad to Eric Wilson, I've seen a lot of people do it, but it's a very lazy comparison. Um, Norzad easily, he would have been drafted last year had he tried to go to the draft. Wilson did not have that when he transferred to Penn State. Excuse me. Norzad only transferred because he wanted to play in a bigger conference against better competition in order to raise his draft value. So I think Norzad, I know a lot of people are going to make that comparison. It's a lazy one. Norzad is a better player, more athletically and physically gifted than Eric Wilson was, but you still need to see it. You've got Slim Wormley, who was supposed to be a starter last year, but he's coming off injury. And right tackle might be the biggest question mark on this entire offense. Not a knock on Caden Wallace at all, but he's not a tackle. He's a guard. He's a guard all the way who's been forced to play tackle for a variety of reasons and has not gone well. And I have no reason to believe it's going to start to go well this year. So I think the offensive line will be better. It has to. It almost has to be. Like, I can't envision it not improving over how poor it was last year. That said, still a lot of question marks. I think the left side can be really good, but they're two young guys who are going to take some lumps early in the year. Norzad's got to prove he can do it against a better competition. Wallace, a right tackle, is just a complete question mark of just, what we have seen has not been good. And hey, it's we'll see what happens. I think they're getting there with the offensive line, with the bodies, with the talent. They're not there yet, but they should improve. I mean, if nothing else, the odds say they should be better than last year.
Yeah, the offensive line I think should improve, should take a step up from where it was last year, but I think it's still a year or two away from being a true strength of the team of the program. That we can expect them to go out there every week and set the tone in the trenches. Um, I agree with you on Wallace. I mean, Wallace is a guy who showed a lot as a fresh, his first year starting, or and he has the size to be a dominant offensive lineman, but he last year was just extremely poor, and that's somebody they expected to be an anchor of the offensive line when they recruited him. So it's been a disappointing development process for him so far. We'll see how it goes this year. Um, the big thing with the offensive line, I think, is once you get past the starters, and I mean, even with the starters, there's just not a ton of depth and experience depth at that on this offensive line. I mean, backing up for Shauna, who's limited in terms of his own experience, is Jimmy Christ. He's appeared in one game. Um, Landon Tangwall is being backed up by J.B. Nelson, who does have JUCO experience. Um, Juice Scruggs is being backed up by Nick Dawkins, who has special teams experience, but uh, limited stamps offensively. I mean, is by far the best half of the starters there. And then Bryce has experience, but if Penn State has to rely on at right tackle at all, it could be a problem for him and the defense.
Yeah, the depth of the offensive line that it's not there, and that's a big reason why I still have concerns about the offensive line going into the season. Um, if you're one or two injuries away from really being in the soup a little bit there. Like I said, getting Sal Wormley back is big. Hopefully, JB Nelson will be ready to go. Jimmy Christ seems to be ahead of where they thought he would be at this point, but he's probably still needs another year yet. So we'll see what happens. You really got to hope for health, which on an offensive line, unfortunately, you're probably not going to have a whole lot of health. But if Penn State can stay healthy and you can get Tangwall and Fashanu to take that next step forward, and for Norzad to play at the level he can play at, and hopefully Scruggs can improve, even if right tackle is an issue, you can kind of help hide it at that point. You can put a tight end over there. You can do what you got to do. But yeah, I do think the offensive line, like I say, I expect it to improve. I don't necessarily expect it to be good. And that there's definitely some question marks and concerns there with the depth. And one other thing, though, with the line, I will add, I think that could help this season is adding a back like Singleton to the mix. There were times last year they didn't last long, but there were holes there to hit, and Penn State just didn't have the running backs capable of doing it. Think of Saquon Barkley, think of Miles Sanders, some of the poor lines they played behind. They didn't need a lot of room to get some wiggle and burst to make a play. I think Singleton can bring that, which can also, that's not going to make the line play better, but it's going to make the line play look better than it is.
Yeah, having a running back like a Saquon Barkley, a Miles Sanders, a Journey Brown, and now potentially Nick Singleton really masks those offensive struggles because they have the shiftiness, they have the athleticism, they have the speed and elusiveness to make men miss no matter where they are on the field and to get through even the smallest of holes. 100% on that. Um, yeah, offensive line is going to be a work in progress. I think it could be a little rough to start the season, but I think as the season goes on, definitely should see signs of improvement. I mean, against Purdue, I mean, you're going to need them to perform rather well. I know Purdue doesn't have George Karlaftis there anymore, but still has some upside on that defensive line. Ohio, you should be able to survive, but you're going to need an offensive line for that offering game on September 17th. Big year for Phil Travon in that offensive line room. Fun, I guess, quickly on Mike Yurcich. I thought last year play calling for the most part was fine. There was some play calls at times. But it's going to be a big year for him. Penn State Virtual Rocca to get Mike Yurcich prior to last season. And I don't think I think it's fair. I think it's fair to say the last year was not how James Franklin and Mike Yurcich expected that offense to go. I expected they thought it would be very similar to the Joe Moorhead days, which it wasn't. It took a step back from what Kirk Shiraka did. So I think it's a big year for Mike Yurcich as well. Play calling, I don't think people should be concerned about. But at the end of the day, any offensive struggles ultimately land on him.
Yeah, play calling is definitely the least of my concerns with Mike Yurcich. I mean, you look last year that with Penn State season, so easy to go back to the Iowa game, but to go back to the Iowa game, he was coaching circles around Phil Parker, who is one of the best defense coordinators in the country. I mean, Penn State was just gashing that offense or that defense and moving the ball at will until Clifford got hurt. Yursich has a track record. He did it for years at Oklahoma State, spent that 1 year at Ohio State where he wasn't the offensive coordinator, but was Justin Fields' quarterback coach. And look how that turned out. And then a year at Texas, where, I mean, this was Texas being a hot mess at the tail end of the Tom Herman era. So you can kind of throw all that out the window. But excuse me, yeah, I think Yursich is definitely the right guy. And I do think last year, too, you've got to remember how hampered his offense was between the quarterback situation and offensive line that couldn't get out of its own way. It's just, it was one thing after another the second half of the season. So I personally have no issues at all about Mike Yursich. I know I have said this to you in texts and things of that nature, but 3 or 4 years ago, if you had told me Penn State's coordinators were going to be Mike Yursich and Manny Diaz, I told you were nuts. I was like, there's no way they'd ever spend the money they'd need for guys like that. So that's two things that, yes, I have some concerns heading into the season, but two things I'm not concerned about are Mike Yursich coordinating the offense and Manny Diaz coordinating the defense. And obviously, our next show we'll get more into the defense, but I think Penn State's in a good shape with their coordinators.
We're just going to say the same thing. We'll be obviously getting Manny Diaz and his defense next week. The last thing I'd say, going back to the offensive line quickly, is Phil Travon. I know it's been a struggle the first 2 years on the field, but with this season and especially next season, um, he's starting to get his guys into the offensive line room on the offensive line now, being able to be on the field after they develop. I think that's going to be big for him because I mean it is important, and it is there is different offensive line coaches see different things in different players, have their own things they like to target in players. So what Troutwine likes in offensive lineman may not have been what Lime Grover liked in offensive lineman, and vice versa. So I think that's going to be big for Troutwine, and that's why I think even if this year's a struggle, Penn State probably still may give Troutwine another year because his recruiting is phenomenal on the offensive line the last cycle and this cycle, um, and he has a track record. Same thing with Yursich. He's phenomenal with quarterbacks. He knows how to develop them, and his track record proves that he's a good offense coordinator, good quarterbacks coach. So that'll be those are my two last thoughts on that. Any other thoughts on the Penn State offense going into next
No, I
season?
will
This season?
build off the Troutwine comment real quick. And if you look at the kind of offense lineman Matt Limegrover liked to recruit to what Phil Troutwine likes, a totally different type of player. So I mean, I think that definitely needs to be a factor also. And I've been very critical of Phil Troutwine for the offense line the last 2 years, but like you said, he starts to get his guys in there, and he likes the more of the big bruiser, just gun out, physical, manhandle, maul you at the point of attack type of guy. And hey, you know what? As a former offensive lineman, give me that all day long because I would rather get the offensive lineman that I know is going to do that as opposed to taking the kid who might be, gifted athletically, but you don't know it's not a position for everybody. So, there's a certain mindset you have to have to play the position. I think Troutwine's going to start to get that out of his guys, and like I said, the offense line thing improves this year, and if it doesn't, I don't know if Phil Troutwine will get a fourth season.
All right, well, I think that's all I got this for this episode and this week. We will give our predictions of what the offense should look like, or what we will give predictions later on this month on the offense of in terms of what we expect points per game, yardage wise, any out of each position group, performance wise. But for this week, our quick preview. Thank you everybody for listening to another episode of the Penn State Football 365 podcast. I'm Dylan Callaghan-Croley. He's Marty Leap. Be sure to subscribe to Nittany Nation and get your free trial for the rest of the month of August. Be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok at Penn State Rivals, as you can see at the bottom, as well as the podcast at PSU FB365. You can follow me on Twitter at Dylan C underscore FB. Marty, where can they follow you at?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at MSJ41817, and don't ever be afraid to check out Black Sheep Diaries and what I have going on over there. And whenever you're not perusing the boards in the nation, feel free to go over there and check us out as well.
Absolutely great site over there that I spent a few years at myself. But until next time, everybody, thank you for listening. thank you for listening to another episode, and we'll talk to you guys next week. Especially a lot more on the recruiting side of things, but as we preview the Penn State defense as well. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the nice weather.